unabashed,
the most unpredictable,
becomes a headline,
the most volatile,
outrageous behavior,
unsubstantiated narratives, a battle of personalities.
Welcome to Grand Tamasha, a co-production of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and the Hindustan Times. I'm your host, Milan Vaishnav. In just a few days, India's 18th general elections will get underway, with voting in the first phase kicking off on April 19th. Between April 19th and June 1st, India will have 7 separate polling days, culminating in a final counting of votes on June 4th. Every single pre-election survey to date shows the ruling BJP alliance winning a comfortable majority of seats in the Lok Sabha. If these predictions come to fruition, it would be the first time that a party has won 3 consecutive elections under the same leader since Congress during the Nehru period. To preview these elections and what they mean for India's future, I'm joined today by Sukumar Ranganathan, editor-in-chief of the Hindustan Times. Few people in India have observed and analyzed politics, economics, and social change as comprehensively as Sukumar. Sukumar, thanks for coming back to the show.
Great to be here, Milan.
So let me start with a big question. We are recording this conversation just days before voters in the first phase go to polls. Many commentators, and I'm sure you've heard a lot of this in Delhi, have remarked that they can't really recall a general election with as little suspense or as little masala as this current edition. Do you agree with that assessment?
I do, because usually, even before the first phase, it's of course important to acknowledge the fact that the elections are spread over 7 phases. The first phase is on April 19th and the last phase is on June 1. So that's a significant period. And you would be forgiven for thinking that, it's all right to start slow and then things will peak. But 102 seats go to polls in phase 1, which is on April 19th. By this time, usually, there is a lot of activity that is happening, not just on the ground, but in the back rooms. There is a certain excitement about the elections. There is a certain buzz. There are lots of controversies. There's a lot of noise, irrespective of whether there is enough signal or not, right? There is a lot of noise. And this time, perhaps because the outcome seems a certainty to many people, and I would have to say that it seems a certainty to me. I think there isn't as much excitement that's happening. I also think that the opposition bloc, the India bloc, has not really managed to either hold too many joint rallies, highlight some of the specific issues that are there in the country at this point in time, and present an alternative vision, because normally the narrative tends to be about their inability to present an alternative face. And I'm not even going there. So even if you look beyond personalities, if you look at the alternative vision, the alternative plans that they have, the alternative policies that they have, you don't seem to see too much cogency about that. You don't see a lot of that in the press. Sure, there is the Congress manifesto document that came out, but as one of our data analysts told me, and the first thing he told me after going through the entire document was that this seems to be the manifesto of a party that seems reasonably confident that it is not coming to power. Right? Right? And I think that is what is being reflected on the ground.
So this is the kind of nub of the issue. So I'm glad that you brought us here. I think many observers have said a version of what you just said, which is that they're not really sure what this election is about, right? I mean, there doesn't seem to be a kind of defining issue. There's not an animating crisis as there was with Pulwama and Balakot in 2019. So I guess the question to you is, Is this simply a referendum on a decade of governance under Prime Minister Modi? And if so, what is the record that he's advertising to voters?
I wouldn't call it a referendum as much as it is the expression of either a willingness or an unwillingness to sign on with the current dispensation's vision for this country going forward. And you make a very valid point, because if you go back and you look at 2004, there was a very real issue at that point in time, because back then you had an NDA government under Vajpayee, and they were speaking about India shining, but there was significant rural distress, largely caused by the fact that the previous monsoon had been patchy and the one before that had been deficient. So it was happening against the backdrop of significant agrarian distress. 2009, you had a government that came back to power because of of a huge welfare program that it launched for farmers, which was the writing off of farm loans, and the fact that there were a significant number of fiscal shocks that were introduced to help India tide over the financial crisis. Right? Then you had 2014, when the big issue was really corruption and mismanagement of the economy, because while if you go back in time and look at the 2014 metrics, they look good. The 2013 metrics are abysmal, the economic metrics. So it was pretty much a referendum on that mismanagement, on the corruption scandals that were happening at that point in time. 2019, you had the national security issues that you spoke about. You had Pulwama, and now you really have nothing, right? I mean, you have an economy that is doing well. Sure, there is a K-shaped recovery, but you know, the fact is it is an economy that is doing well based on the metrics. You do not have any of the corruption scandals or controversies that you saw in 2014. You do not have a big national security issue like you saw in 2019. There is no agrarian distress like you saw in 2004. The farmers may be angry about various things, but there is no agrarian distress of the level that we saw even during some years in the first Modi government, right? I think what you're seeing now is pretty much a steady state election. So there are policies of the current government, and there are articulated statements of intent on how this government plans to take the country forward. The Prime Minister has spoken often about these. And it's a question of whether you buy into it or you don't buy into it. And if you buy into it, the extent to which you buy into it. And that is what this election is really going to be a function of. So it's going to be a function of the welfare schemes of this government. It's going to be a function of Hindutva, of course. And it's going to be a function of the development narrative of this government, especially the future-looking development narrative of this government. Because I think if you look at their plans for 2047 and what they want to make India in 2047, it is really to move India from being a lower middle-income country to a middle-income country. It is a significant economic transformation that is being spoken about. And that is really what this election is going to be about. To be sure, none of this comes across if you listen to the opposition narrative that is there, because the message that you will get if you see that is if you see the way the opposition has gone about this, is that democracy is under threat. So this is an election for the for the future of the soul of India, and you know that is really the mismatch that is there between the two approaches that we have. So the BJP is speaking about development 2047. It's of course speaking about a lot of other things, because if you look at the typical BJP pitch, it comes with various layers to it, right? And this is manifest in the Prime Minister's own speeches. Speaks about dynasty, speaks about corruption, loves to speak about the past, loves to speak about the Congress party and how it governed India, loves to speak about the Gandhi family. All of the Prime Minister as well as various other BJP leaders love to speak about Rahul Gandhi. If he didn't exist, I think they would have to invent someone like him, right? I mean, they love to speak about him. But at the end of the day, they're also speaking about 2047, a vision for what they call Viksit Bharat, right? I mean, it's a term that you must have heard many times. It means developed India. Whereas if you look at the opposition narrative, it doesn't really give you an alternative vision. It just tells you our way of life is under threat, right? Democracy is under threat. And so if you are someone who subscribes to that notion, you will vote for the opposition. But if you're someone who doesn't believe in that, you will vote for the government.
So you honed in on this question of the economy, and I think, as you rightly said, India's economy is doing pretty well, and certainly that is the case when you look at the macro numbers, particularly in a comparative perspective, right? Growth remains elevated relative to both the developed and the emerging world. Inflation is somewhat high, but has come down significantly from the past. We're seeing a lot of buzz about new investments, whether it's Apple, whether it's Foxconn, potentially a new major investment from Tesla and Elon Musk. But if you look at perceptions, right, recently Lokniti CSDS has published the findings of their pre-election survey. There was quite a lot of disenchantment with the state of the economy on bread and butter issues, right? Price rise, unemployment, livelihoods. To what extent do you think those are real concerns? Because they don't seem to be hurting or harming the ruling dispensation in any significant way, at least if the survey results on the voting side can be believed.
I think they are real issues. I don't think anyone is making up the fact that the price rise has been a problem. I don't think anyone is making up the issue of unemployment being a problem. I think these are very real issues. I just don't think that they are issues at a magnitude or at a degree at which they will affect the outcome of this election. And the reason for that is if you look at the cross-section of India's population, the welfare measures of the government have taken care of the needs of a significant chunk of the poor population. If there is one thing that the Modi government has done exceedingly well over the last 10 years, it is to perfect and finally hone a delivery mechanism that can get welfare benefits across to the intended recipients with very, very insignificant leakage and fairly effectively. And I think that makes a huge difference in a country that still has a lot of first-generation problems, or at least had a lot of first-generation problems when the current dispensation took over in 2014. For instance, our own reporting has thrown up the fact that in 2024, piped water could be a significant issue in certain parts of North India, which didn't have piped water till a little time back, right? And now, thanks to one of these missions, as this government calls them, the Jal Jeevan mission, translates into water is life mission. A lot of areas that didn't used to get piped water now actually get piped water. Now, this is as first generation a problem as you can think of, right? I mean, in the hierarchy of problems. But the fact that this government has managed to solve it makes a big difference to a certain chunk of the population. So that's what I mean when I say welfare benefits. Not all welfare benefits need to be in cash. Some of these have to do with infrastructural issues. So that's one part of it. Then there is the second part of it, which is really the whole Hindutva part of it. I think this is not something that, some people blow this out of proportion. Some people like to not talk about this at all. But at the end of the day, it's important to acknowledge the fact that this Hindutva appeal of this government resonates with a significant chunk of this country's population, right? Who across the country, and not just in the north, but even in the south. And the response to the Ram temple, for instance, is and I'm again not saying this based on what is generally believed or what you see on social media, but based on what our reporters are telling me from across the country. Right? So that makes the difference. Then you have the whole economic transformation that's happened in this country. And the fact is, there is a certain sliver of population which is at the top of the economic pyramid, which has really grown in size, benefited significantly. And there is a little bit of trickle down that is happening from there. But there is clearly an economic narrative of going out there, getting things done, making a start in things like manufacturing. Right? Mobile phones, for instance, when this government first launched its production-linked incentive scheme for mobile phones, and there was a lot of skepticism about it because the feeling was you were just paying people to come here and make phones, but it's ended up making the country competitive in that aspect of electronics manufacturing. Apple alone has exported $10 billion worth of phones from this country in the last year, which is a huge number. And the important thing to understand about manufacturing, at least manufacturing circa 2024 anywhere in the world, is that when you want companies to nearshore manufacturing, you have to offer incentives. And the U.S. recognizes this fact, right? I mean, the U.S. CHIPS Act, for instance, is built around this very premise. The people are not going to manufacture locally unless you make sure that there are adequate incentives for them to manufacture locally. So it's actually working in certain aspects. So I think you put all these together, I think it adds up. And that's the message that this government is going to the polls with.
So let me just ask you on the kind of political side here. I think the BJP has surprised a lot of experts by really working overtime these last few months to reconstruct its somewhat diminished NDA coalition, its National Democratic Alliance coalition. We expected to see frenetic coalition management on the opposition side, right? They've tried to pull together 36 parties under the heading of the India Alliance. But we've instead seen it on the ruling party side. To what do you chalk up this expansion of the NDA?
One, and this is a truly tough question. It's a tough question because we don't really have an answer for this, right? What I do have are theories. And one theory, according to one theory, the answer is pragmatism. Because if you look at the BJP last time, they won 303 seats in the Lok Sabha. And if you break down that performance across states, they pretty well maxed out their performance in many states. So when the Prime Minister speaks about 370, I don't know where those numbers are going to come from. Right? And if you were to sit down and just look at even the 303 number. I don't know where 303 is going to come from, right? So it's just, and this is not to say that the party is doing badly. It's just that I think their 2019 performance was so strong. UP, of course, Mayawati put up a surprisingly strong performance last time, and the BJP can expect to do better. But if you look at the Hindi belt, other than, Bihar maxed out along with their partner. Gujarat won all the seats. Rajasthan won all the seats. Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh. I think across Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, and Rajasthan, they lost 3 seats. Did exceedingly well in Maharashtra with their ally, which was the United Shiv Sena at that time. Put up a surprisingly strong showing in West Bengal. Did quite well in the Northeast. Maxed out Haryana. Maxed out Uttarakhand. So where are the numbers going to come from, right? And
I mean, this is sort of what economists refer to as ceiling effects, right?
Yeah,
I mean, if you've already gone to 100%, there's nowhere else to go.
There's
right?
nowhere else to go. And which probably explains why the Prime Minister has been focusing so much on the south of the country, right? I mean, it's an area where there is room for growth. I don't know whether the returns will come. At least not in the short term. In the long term, of course, I think there are various reasons as to why the returns will come if this party stays on in power. But in the short term, but I do expect a significant improvement in the BJP's vote share, even in a state like Tamil Nadu, where I think last time they won 3 or 4% of the popular vote. I expect them to win anything over 15-16% of the popular vote this time. Not confident that it will translate into seats. So alliances is one way to ensure that the NDA's overall number goes up from last time. And I think the reason why a lot of parties are perhaps keen to ally with the BJP, or at least have talks with the BJP, is the answer to our first question, right? I mean, the outcome of this election is pretty much a given. And so if you're a regional party, it probably makes sense to start talking to a party which you know is anyway going to win, with you or without you.
Hey, Grant the Masha listeners. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Putting this show together each week is a labor of love, but it takes a lot of work to put out a great show every week. If you'd like to support the work we do at Grant the Masha, please visit ceip.org/donate. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or on your favorite podcasting platform, so you'll be the first to know when a new episode rolls out. So you touched upon the South, and of course you hail from the South. You know it very well. If there's a contest going on this election, it's going to be happening in the southern states. I think, as you rightly pointed out, the BJP and the Prime Minister have made no secret of their desire to make new inroads in the South generally, but Tamil Nadu specifically. The Prime Minister has visited there on several occasions. The party has even dredged up this somewhat esoteric dispute with Sri Lanka over a contested island most of us had forgotten about. The party has been touting its new face in the state, the former police officer Annamalai. How seriously should we take the BJP's Southern Gambit?
Fairly seriously, because I think the one thing that's become very, very clear over the last decade is that you should take the BJP seriously anywhere, right? I mean, this is a party that is willing to invest in the long term, put significant resources in play, and just keep, figuratively banging their head against the wall until the wall gives. And you've seen that across many states. And I think the South at this point in time, at least Tamil Nadu, is in a very interesting stage because it's typically been a play between the DMK and the AIDMK, the two Dravidian parties. And the AIDMK has been especially weakened. It's been weakened by a split within the party. It's actually the third split that has happened in the party over the last 5 years. The first one was not a significant split, but this one, again, not hugely significant, but you have a former chief minister who's pretty much no longer with the AIDMK. And there are pockets where he will have a presence. But what has happened is that the AIDMK seems much weaker than it ever did in any previous election. It used to be an ally of the BJP. The 2019 election was one that they fought together. So the BJP's assessment is that perhaps this is the time to break away from the AIDMK and try to establish itself as an independent presence. Now, what else is going for the BJP in Tamil Nadu? And this is really an interesting question. Our data and political economy editor, Roshan, and I have had several conversations on this. We've sat and looked at data, and it's fascinating. It's fascinating because I think the story really needs to start from what's happened in Mumbai. And if you look at what's happened in Mumbai, I think Mumbai is a classic example of an area where electoral preferences have changed over the long term thanks to large-scale migration. Right? And we expect to see something similar in Tamil Nadu. And the reason is the daily wage in Tamil Nadu is probably among the highest in the country. The net replacement rate of population has reached a level which is quite low. So they need a lot of labor, and a lot of their workers come from the Northeast, East India, the central part of East India, people from Odisha, people from Bihar, people from East UP, especially in the industrial belt. And in India, all of us are migrants, right? I mean, I moved to Delhi 30 years ago, but within 6 months of moving to Delhi, domicile rules allow you to get a voting card and vote in Delhi. And so, Tirupur, for instance, where there are a lot of workers from the Hindi heartland, some of them will go back to vote, but some of them are making their lives in Tirupur, right? I mean, they're making their lives in that belt. They will start voting there. And their preferences are going to be their natural preferences. And for many of them, the natural preference is the BJP. So you're going to start seeing that. There's a third aspect as well, which is, so the first aspect is the AIDMK, the second aspect is the migration. The third aspect is really the fact that, like we discussed, over the last 10 years, this government has managed to sell a certain economic narrative of India, which has found resonance among a large number of people. And those people are there in the South too. So, could all this add up into a higher vote share? For sure. But in India's first past the post system, is that going to mean that the BJP is suddenly going to get 10 seats out of 39 in Tamil Nadu? Perhaps not. But does it mean they could get 3 to 5 seats? It's a possibility. And I think pragmatically, this is a very pragmatic party, right? I mean, they, of course, like all political parties, they have to go out and say, we are going to win, we are going to get a majority. But 3 to 5 seats in a state like Tamil Nadu for a national party is huge. Because the Congress in Tamil Nadu survives because of its partner. It is a state that has not been ruled by any of the national parties since the late 1960s. So to make an entry in that state, and for a party which until recently, and even today, is pejoratively referred to in that state as a Hindi party, for that party to make a dent there will be significant. So I think that is going to be one of the things to watch. Tamil Nadu, all 39 seats go to elections on the 19th. So quite interesting.
So let me kind of come back to the process for a moment, because there's been quite a lot of grumbling about the length of these elections, right? They're going to run for a total of 44 days, well into the heat of the summer. Now, the Election Commission has said this is for security reasons and logistical reasons. The opposition, however, counters that this extended calendar helps the ruling party because it allows Mr. Modi to spend more time strategically campaigning in places where his presence would really benefit the party. On the process and on the calendar, because this comes to the issue of the kind of level playing field. What do you make of it?
Close to 1 billion people are going to vote in these elections, right? And that's a huge number. And it's a physical process, right? I mean, people have to go stand in a queue. There is a booth. They will have to cast a vote.
On an electronic voting machine?
On an electronic voting machine. You will need those machines, right? Which need to be transported across the country. So it is logistically a very challenging exercise, and it is an exercise that takes time. So I'm not going to comment on 44 days or 47 days or 54 days or something, but I have been reading some commentary which looks at how much time the first election in this country took, how much time the fourth election in this country took, how much time this election is taking. And the fact simply is that you have close to 1 billion people who are eligible to vote, even assuming a 70% turnout. That's 700 million people who are going to vote. So it is a physically very, very challenging process. Sure, any incumbent is going to give itself all the advantage that it can get, right? But at the end of the day, when I look at the activity on the ground, even in the South, I see the energy with which the BJP has approached this election, and I see the energy with which the opposition has approached this election, and there is simply no comparison between the two. Now, you can attribute it to the BJP having more resources than the opposition, but the fact is, it is what it is. I do not for a minute think that the duration of this election is going to affect its outcome. Right? But that's my view. There may be people who think that the duration is the only reason that the BJP won, but I don't see the duration of this election as a factor at all. We would have all loved the election to be done in a month. It would have made our own job so much easier, right?
Well, but so there's multiple ways of looking at it, because obviously one issue is related to the process, which is about the calendar, and you've said very clearly that, look, it may give some marginal advantage to the ruling party, but that's not really the factor that's going to make or break this election. Another thing some of the critics point to is the fact that these elections will begin with not one but two opposition chief ministers in jail, right? So we have Hemant Soren of Jharkhand, who technically resigned as chief minister before he was arrested, but Arvind Kejriwal of Delhi is still the incumbent chief minister. He's behind bars. Do you think these arrests will have any impact on the final outcome, either positively helping the BJP or potentially the cause of some blowback for the party?
It's for the courts to decide on the merits of the case. Huh? So that's something I'm very clear on, because I'm not equipped to comment on the merits of the case in both Mr. Soren's case and Mr. Kejriwal's case. But my own submission is simply that even if the elections had not been announced, even if this had been a non-election year, I have a feeling that this would have still happened. You would have still had the two of them being arrested and placed in jail. That the elections were not the reason why they were arrested, but that there was an ongoing investigation that had been launched. Now, you could very well say that the investigation was politically motivated. If so, it's for the courts to judge on that and throw the case out. And India's Supreme Court has by and large shown itself to be very, very fair when it comes to these things. Will it have an impact on the outcome of the election? I don't see a positive outcome from the perspective of the BJP, really. Because if anything, this could help AAP in Delhi. Delhi is an interesting place because it's a union territory which has always, I mean, at least since 2015, overwhelmingly voted for Kejriwal's Aam Aadmi Party in the assembly elections, and overwhelmingly voted for Narendra Modi's Bharatiya Janata Party in the national election.
Right. And in voter surveys, respondents are pretty clear that the same individual holds a different preference vis-a-vis the state assembly vis-a-vis the national
The question
parliament.
is, could Kejriwal's arrest change that? And my submission is perhaps for a few voters. So if anything, it might give up a slightly higher chance. But I'm not sure that it helps the BJP in any way. Same with Jharkhand. I'm not sure it helps the BJP in any way. But I seriously believe that irrespective of whether there were elections happening in 2024 or not, the arrests would have anyway happened.
Let me just kind of link this to another issue I wanted to kind of take your temperature on, which is this question of the dozens of high-profile defections of opposition leaders joining the BJP in the run-up to these polls. Some of these individuals have been under investigation, and people have speculated that that might be part of their motive for kind of seeking refuge with the ruling party. But many others have chosen to join the BJP for other reasons. Now, if you look back in history, and we will link to HT's fabulous app and collection of kind of the chronological history of elections from 51, 52 and analysis that you guys have done, when there's a dominant party in India, we see this kind of gravitational pull at play, right? When there was the Congress, people defected from other parties towards the Congress. When the Congress was down, they defected and went away. But the BJP is an interesting beast, right? Because it's not just any old dominant party. It's a cadre-based party, and it's an ideologically driven party, which makes it very distinct from the Congress. Do you think the BJP is taking a risk by welcoming so many outsiders, the risk of diluting its brand?
Good question. Our data team is currently doing a large-scale analysis of defections from 1950s onwards. It's not done yet, but I'm told that there's no significant aberration in this election, but that's, it's work in progress. So I don't want to make any conclusions on the basis of that. But at least anecdotally, what we've noticed is that a large number of people have been defecting. Many of them are joining the BJP, of course, and the reasons for joining the BJP, it shouldn't surprise anyone that people want to join the BJP. This is a party which is in power in the center. And when a party is in power in the center and in power in a significant number of states, it is possible to accommodate senior people in multiple positions, right? I mean, there are so many rewards that you can get. Rajya Sabha memberships, governorships, directorships of public limited companies, chairmanships of state cooperatives. When a party is not in power, you do not have the ability to do this, right? I mean, so for instance, look at Assam, for instance, right? I mean, the BJP fought the election under Sonowal, Sarbananda Sonowal, who was the chief minister, but it was very clear that Himanta Biswa Sharma would become the new chief minister. But because it is a party in power in the center, it was able to find a nice ministership for Mr. Sonowal in the center. And the power transition happened very smoothly. You contrast this with what's happening with the Congress, let's say, in many states, where the party has pretty much imploded because of a rivalry between multiple claimants to the chief minister's post in cases where the party comes to power. And you see the limitations of what happens when you're in power in only a few states. Right? It's equally interesting to also note that because the BJP has this, one of the things that the party keeps looking at, and some of their leaders keep talking about this concept called winnability, right? I mean, not an English word, but we've made it one, the way we do with a lot of things in this country, right? Right? They changed a lot of their sitting MPs. Some of their sitting MPs who don't get renominated as a candidate simply defect. We've seen this in several states, or they contest as an independent. So I think you have turncoats across parties, and the way it typically works in any system is that it's only understandable that a higher concentration of the turncoats go to the party in power, right? Just like it is elementary to see why a significant chunk of electoral bonds will go to the party in power, right? I mean, one follows the other. It's not the other way around. I think some people make the serious mistake of thinking that the party wins because of turncoats. I don't think that's the case. I think they make the mistake of thinking that the party wins because it gets the money from the electoral bonds. I don't think that's the case. I think the money from electoral bonds goes to the party because it wins. I think the turncoats gravitate to this party because it wins. And I think it's very, very important to make that distinction. I just want to make one point here at the larger level, and this is something that we've been saying for some time. What we've noticed over the last 10 years is that in stock markets, you have this concept called a conglomerate premium, right? When you have a conglomerate, you have two concepts. One is called a conglomerate premium. The other one's called a conglomerate discount. A conglomerate premium is where the whole gets valued at more than the sum of the parts because there is a certain conglomerate premium that is there. And I think in the BJP's case, there is a conglomerate premium, helps them across states. I think in the Congress's case, the unfortunate thing is there is probably a conglomerate discount. It's something that hurts them across states. I know this might be a very facile explanation of what's happening, but when you speak about why the BJP does not lose big elections, why it invariably does far better in Lok Sabha elections than it does in state elections, it's easy to see how a concept like a conglomerate premium could fit in there.
So, Sukumar, we are, after all, on the eve of elections. You have a busy newsroom to manage. Let me conclude by asking you one last question, which is, let's move beyond the election. As you discussed, and we said at the top, we're most likely looking at a third term for Mr. Modi. The BJP has recently released its manifesto. Obviously, the Prime Minister has been campaigning intensively, talking about what his government would like to do if brought back to power. Tell us a little bit, in your own words, about what we know about their agenda, right? How might they like to use their power if they emerge victorious come June 4th?
Tough question, right? I mean, because and the reason I say tough question is because in 2019, none of us had a clue on the abrogation of 370. Right? I mean,
it had been obviously a long time mainstay of every manifesto, yes, but there was no reason to believe that shortly after they would launch into this, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It had been a constant in their manifesto, but no one knew that it was going to happen in 2019. Right. No one expected it to happen at all, right? So this is a party that will do brave things, will do radical things. Can we expect to see a uniform civil code? It's there in their manifesto, but it's always been there in their manifesto. Tough to say, right? And the reason it's tough to say is because it's very, very complex, given the and it's not just a question of faith. It's also a question of the fact that this country has a significant population of scheduled tribes and their own personal laws or personal common laws are very different. So if you were to enforce something like the Uniform Civil Code, it's going to have to be done in a very nuanced fashion. It's going to be reasonably cumbersome to do. So I do not know.
And we just point out for your listeners, all of our listeners, that the BJP ruled state of Uttarakhand has piloted a uniform civil code for its state in which scheduled tribes are exempt, right? They're allowed to follow their own customs. Just to show you that the idea of uniformity is not so easy when you try to implement it in practice.
Because it's not really uniform, right? I mean, you're leaving out a chunk of the population from it, right? And so I'm not sure that you're going to see that. If you see it, it's going to be a very nuanced kind of thing. What we are likely to see is a far clearer thrust when it comes to the economy. I think many of the things that this government has focused on, it will continue to focus on. I think it will focus significantly on manufacturing, not just on soft manufacturing, but on high-tech manufacturing. That's going to be a huge thrust area. I think welfare will continue because this is a country where you cannot do without welfare. But to me, the interesting challenge really for the third term is that, like we discussed, the BJP has been splendid in solving first generation problems, right? I mean, sanitation, water, power, these are all first generation problems. You move up a level and you come to the slightly more complex second generation problems where it's not just a question of hardware, but it's a question of hardware and software. Employment, health, education, these are all second generation problems, far more difficult to solve. And there the track record is mixed, right? It'll be interesting to see how they address that. And then you have third generation problems, right? I mean, this is after all a country which is unfortunately located pretty poorly from the perspective of the climate crisis, right? I mean, we are in the hot zone, right? And a 1 degree centigrade or a 1.5 degree centigrade increase in temperature, it's really going to change cropping patterns across the country. You can no longer grow what you used to grow in the place where you used to grow them. So you're going to see significant change as sea levels increase. It's a country with a huge coastline. Both Mumbai and Chennai are cities which are pretty much at sea level or marginally a few meters above sea level. So what's going to happen to them, right? So these are third generation challenges. How are you going to address those third generation challenges, which are going to be really complex when it comes to it? And those are issues that this government is going to face in its third term. It's going to be interesting.
My guest on the show this week is Sukumar Ranganathan. He is the editor-in-chief of the Hindustan Times. We have been lucky and privileged to collaborate with HT on a series of long-form essays called India Elects 2024, which you can find on the HT and Carnegie websites. Also, of course, have been privileged to collaborate on this podcast since the run-up to the 2019 elections. So we have now hit our 5-year mark. Sukumar, thanks so much for taking the time. Always good to speak with you.
Lovely chatting with you, Milan.
Grant Tamasha is a co-production of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and the Hindustan Times. This podcast is an HT Smartcast original and is available on htsmartcast.com. You can also find us on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to rate and review. It helps others find the show more easily. For more information about the show and to find the writing we mentioned on this week's episode, visit our website, granttamasha.com. Tim Martin is our audio engineer, and Mira Verghese is our executive producer. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.
This was a Hindustan Times production brought to you by HT Smartcast.
HT Smartcast.